Every year, I reread Emerson's essay, Self-Reliance. And I would like you to give me permission to read one paragraph from it. I think you'll recognize the main quote, but there's a little more to it. A foolish consistency is the hobgoblin of little minds, adored by little statesmen and philosophers and divines. With consistency, a great soul simply has nothing to do. He may as well concern himself with his shadow on the wall. Speak what you think now in hard words, and tomorrow speak what tomorrow thinks in hard words again, though it contradict everything you said today. Ah, so you're sure to be misunderstood. Is it so bad, then, to be misunderstood? Pythagoras was misunderstood, and Socrates, and Jesus, and Luther, and Copernicus, and Galileo, and Newton, and every pure and wise spirit that ever took flesh. To be great is to be misunderstood. So, when I first heard about design thinking, I thought, IDEO's done it again. They have such a marketing machine. They have taken something as simple and beautiful as user-centered design and rebranded it and charged 3 times as much. I really thought it was a load of bull poo-poo. Hi, Amelie. My daughter's in the audience today. So I was like, that design thinking thing, I have nothing to do with that. What is that? And then I wanted to teach at Stanford. To teach at Stanford is kind of a big thing. Plus, it's only a 5-minute commute from my house. So I wrote up an entrepreneurship class using a design approach. And I sent it to them. And then they rewrote it to put butts in seats, as they say. And it said design thinking everywhere. And I thought, well, I'm either going to have to tell them they can't call it design thinking, or I'm going to have to make my peace with design thinking. So I started thinking about it, and I thought, well, thinking, that's a type of cognition, right? So I contacted my friend Carl Fast, and he's been studying a type of cognition that's called distributed cognition. And it turns out that we don't think with our brains. News, right? It turns out that we think with our hands, with our body, and with the entire world. So think about trying to play a game of Scrabble where you weren't allowed to rearrange the letters. Rearranging the letters makes all the difference, right? Or think about trying to play a game of cards where you couldn't rearrange the cards to see where your suits or your matches were. Especially if you play Shanghai Rummy and you've got like 20 cards in your hand, you need to be able to rearrange things, right? So designers are like these. They're like the card players. They're like the Scrabble players. They think with prototypes. We make things, right? We think with Post-it notes. It's like a joke. Like if you want to stop a designer, take away their Post-it notes. And we think with the walls. The walls act as an extended memory. Working memory isn't very strong. So what we do is we put everything on the wall, and then we can free up our brain cells to think better. So that's the first part of design thinking. But the second part, Carl pointed me at the work of Scott Klemmer, and he says that it's a type of expertise thinking. So you're wondering, what is expertise thinking? Let me use the example of chef thinking. I love food. I've studied at the Cordon Bleu in Paris and the Koh Samui Culinary Academy at the International Culinary Academy in Campbell. And I will tell you that when you really learn to cook, you think differently. So you actually think with the ingredients. You can taste the combinations in your mind. You know every single ingredient so well, it just comes out of you naturally. You think with your materials. You know when to use a food processor, when to use a blender, when to use an old-fashioned pestle, right? Just makes sense. It just feels like. There's an idea in distributed cognition that says that when you stop thinking of your instrument, it becomes a transparent instrument. So if you think about when you sign your name, do you think about how you hold the pen? Do you think about the paper? Do you think about the ink? No, you've used this tool so long that it is invisible to you. And the same with fire. You understand what kind of fire you needed to use when you're a chef. That was one of the things that blew me away when I went to culinary school, is your pan can be used so many different ways. You can make one side hot and one side cool. You can add a little water. You can tent it. You can make a wet oven. You can make a cold oven, a dry oven. This is chef thinking. And we designers are the same way. We know our materials very, very well. And the last piece of what makes design thinking, in my opinion, is world modeling. And world modeling is a way of making sense of the universe by running experiments. So we make a mental model, we test it, we refine it, and then we create a concept model to send out to our users, who then take that in and test it and refine it and rotate through over and over again. This is world modeling. This is Bill Verplancke's world model of how interaction design works. Beautiful, simple concept model. This is user-centered design. Look familiar? Again, it's a constant testing against the universe, and that's what we do. We make things, we test them, we bring them back, we iterate. So IDEO also said that this thing is so powerful, we can use it for more than products. We can use it for wicked problems. And a wicked problem is defined as something that is so hard to fix, it's close to impossible. And when I heard this, I thought, total hubris. Really? You can design all the things with design thinking? I thought they were a little bit full of themselves, to be quite honest. But then I had my call to adventure. You know the hero's journey, where first the hero is refusing? I'm not going on this, but I got an invitation to see if I could use my design powers to do something new. And Jeff Weiner, at that time, was head of search at Yahoo. This is before he went off to LinkedIn and recently made me a lot of money by sending it to Microsoft. But thank you, Jeff. But at that time, Jeff came to me, and I was a senior interaction designer, and I was pretty sassy. I'd founded Box and Arrows. I'd written a book. I was like, I am the designer. I'm so cool. And he came to me and said, Christina, I want you to run this new team that I put together for search. And so right now, you don't manage anybody, but I would like you to now manage 80 designers. I freaked out a little bit. That sounded like a really, really painful, hard thing to do. Like, I had been a restaurant manager once. It's a little bigger of a problem. So I thought about it, and I was like, no, Jeff, I think you've got the wrong person. You don't want me. And he said, Christina, I know you can do it. Therefore, you can do it. And he's like not a guy who takes no, ever, ever, ever. So I was like, okay, I'm going to do it. You believe in me. I can make this happen. I was very excited. So I used my design thinking attitude. I took over this team of misfits. They were all super junior. You have to remember, this was happening back in 2002. So during the dot-com boom, we hired everybody we could actually hire, which tended to be people just out of school. And then the dot-com crash came along, and all of a sudden there were very, very senior designers on the market. I could upgrade my team tremendously. But who should I grow and spend time with, and who should I gently nudge out of the nest? I didn't know what to do. So I used the power of the Post-it notes to figure out how to hire, fire, and give feedback. So in this case, I sat down and, you know how you usually hire someone? You go on the web and you say, that description is close enough, I'll just use that. That didn't seem like the right way to do it. That's not how designers roll. So I carefully free listed, and free listing is writing one idea per Post-it note so you can fragment them and organize them. I free listed the knowledge I wanted. What did I want people to know about? I wanted people to know about search. I wanted people to know about travel. I wanted to know people about shopping. What were the hard skills? Photoshop, Omnigraphal. What were the soft skills? I wanted them to be able to talk to humans, which is something that not all designers are capable of doing. I listed them all out, and I created a job description. And this job description turned out to be the single most useful thing that I would ever do. And right now, it's getting to be a very popular approach. It's called position profiles. But before that, I was just like, let's just figure out what designer I want. And I used this not just to hire, but to create feedback. So back then at Yahoo, I would take these wonderful walks along the water, and I would talk to the people who were working for me. And because I had this list of what they should be able to do, I actually had a conversation piece. Normally when you have a one-on-one with your boss, they're like, hey, how's it going? Trouble with anything? Okay, cool. You're kind of done, right? Instead, I had my little list going, okay, so is there some new software you should be learning? How are you getting along with that product manager? How's this other thing going? I knew exactly what was going on. So when I had those walks, I could definitely have a clear and ordered conversation. As well, I came across this thing. So this is Doodle Revolution. And Sunny Brown is the queen of thinking with her hands. She does everything with Post-it notes and with canvases. And so she came up with this way to give feedback that was based on empathy maps. And I don't know if you're familiar with empathy maps. They've become very popular since they were mentioned in the business model generation book. But basically what you do is you make a quick provisional persona of how people think and feel, what they say and do, what they hear and see. You create a vision of the experience of this person as well as their pains and their gains. And when I saw this, I suddenly went, oh my God, 360 feedback is broken. I don't know if you've ever done a 360 review, but you go around and say, do you have any advice for this person? What are they good at? What do they suck at? And it's kind of a mess, and in California, it's very passive-aggressive as well. It's sort of like, well, they're really awesome, except this one thing that kind of bothers me. What we did with the empathy maps is we actually sat down, everybody drew their face in the middle, and then drew the map, and then the coworkers in these small teams would sit in front of it, and they just free list. What do you think this person thinks? What do you think what their pains and gains are? And it was a way to create a mirror of how people see you. How do they truly see you? Instead of saying, what should they change, it created this amazing empathy among the teams. And suddenly everybody could kind of see themselves. And it created these amazing conversations. For example, one woman saw over and over and over again, the Post-it note said, she sees herself as the only woman on the team. And she's like, I haven't even thought about that. Is this really how people see me? And they had a conversation of what is it like to be the only woman on the team? Does that affect you? Does that upset you? It was an amazing experience. And then I went, well, why is it amazing? I know this stuff, right? All of you designers have seen this heuristic before. Set expectations, meet expectations. Strangely enough, if you're clear with people about what you want from them and you meet them, things work out. Except for when they don't. So I've always been afraid to fire people, but when you have a clear list of everything that's expected from somebody and clear documentation of what they've actually done, that conversation goes a lot more smoothly. You say, here's what I expect from you. Are you going to change? And then you meet the next week and you go, here's what I still expect from you. How's that going? And then you have a conversation where you're like, I still expect it. It hasn't been met. It's time for you to find another place where you can realize your potential. And I know it sounds very passive-aggressive, but again, California, you have to give me a break here. So there's that model again, right? Feedback. I want to find people. I want to give them feedback. And if they don't work out, I'm going to fire them. So designing business. I left Yahoo, and I started my own company. I actually started two back-to-back. I started a consulting company, and then I realized I didn't really like designing what other people want me to design. So I started a product company, and I came across this model, lean startup. The first time I saw this model, I was like, this is very familiar. This looks like user-centered design. How is this actually different, right? You get ideas, you build something, you code it, you measure it, you get data, you learn, classic model. God bless Eric Ries. But then I discovered that markets are like people. Markets have personality. So when I talk about a market, I mean hopefully an extremely large group of people who have a set of understandable and coherent needs that you will make things for. And I started a little company called Cucina Media, and we made blogging software for group blogs. And at this time, if you can think back, TechCrunch was big, Malik's website was big. All the blogs that were actually making money were group blogs. And so what I did was we thought, let's make a group blogging software. It'll be really great. I had a Danish co-founder engineer. We're so excited. We're making this awesome thing. We're eating our own dog food. We made it for Box and Arrows. And then a book came into my life, and it was before Lean Startup. It was Steve Blank's 4 Steps to the Epiphany, and he said, try to sell your product before you build it. Go develop customers. So I went out and started talking to customers, and I found out something. Group blogs have tiny, tiny margins. That means that the difference between what it costs and what the revenue is minuscule. So they do not like to spend money on anything unless they're 100% sure it's perfect, which means that they didn't want our software. They either wanted to use WordPress and suffer, or they wanted to hire an engineer to hack WordPress for them. But it turned out that we could not make anything they actually wanted. Or I could make things they wanted, but they wouldn't pay for it. So that was my first startup, and it was a little bit of a shock, and you guys should be very grateful because now there's Lean Startup and Business Model Canvas. There's so much awesome out there. But at that time, not so much. So we did an acqui-hire. We sold to LinkedIn, and I was hired as a principal product manager at LinkedIn. And LinkedIn does things a little differently. They don't give you anything until you've proven you got a lick of sense. So Reid Hoffman said to me, Christina, events. It was like a scene out of The Graduate. Christina, events, it's our future. I asked him to explain what he meant by that, and he said, professionals do events, right? Events are important. We don't know what we should do in that space. Go out and explore that space. So I did the same thing that I'd done before, but this time I did it at the beginning instead of later. I went out and talked to customers. We went to event organizers, and we turned out they had the same personality as bloggers. They had little tiny margins, and they did not like to spend money on anything, actually kind of ever. So I don't know about UX Lausanne, but at that time it was like that. They don't make a lot of money, they don't like to spend it, but it turns out that they often had a lot of volunteers who were willing to fill out forms, and I could get beautiful metadata. So what I did was I built an events product that had tons and tons of metadata, and then we sold advertisements to hotels and airlines, and that's where the money was. So learning about the market's personality and its attitude and doing lots of rapid iteration made a huge difference. And recently I got to do this again for a company called Storium. Now Storium is a website where people can get together and tell stories together. It's sort of like when you're a teenager and you hide in the basement and you do D&D, you know? And then you get older and you have kids and you can't hang out in the basement anymore and you need a place to get your story fix. So you go online and you tell stories together. And they raised $250,000 on Kickstarter. They were very, very successful. And then they'd been going for a year and it was time to start charging. And they did not know what to do with the pricing model. Like they had said, we're gonna charge $40 a year like Flickr. And then they realized if they did that, they couldn't actually keep the lights on. That was not a viable model. So that meant they were gonna have to change the price with a passionate, engaged community. Now this is insanely, insanely difficult. These people are like, no, Storium doesn't belong to you. It belongs to me. This is where I go tell my stories. All my friends are there. You cannot mess with me. And they'd get really angry if he didn't meet all the promises he'd made on Kickstarter. So what we did is we used my old friend, design thinking. I went out and I did a ton of interviews with the existing customers, and I asked them, what's the value of this website? What else? Where else do you go? How much do you pay for that? Is Storium more like a cup of coffee at Starbucks? Or is it more like giving money to PBS? And we discovered that the community, if we'd done what we thought we were going to do a classic tiers, you know, where every time you pay more, you get more features. That was the worst idea ever because it turned into a transactional website. And as soon as it became transactional, give me some money, I'll give you more things. Give me some money, I'll give you more things. The customer base felt like you sullied, you dirtied their happy place. And they also started asking when they could get more features. They got very angry. So we ended up switching over to a donation model with a recommended donation that was actually quite low. We set the standard donation at $45 a month, but a lot of people pushed it up. We allowed you to donate as much as you want. And there were people who were pushing that lever all the way up to $75 to $125. So by understanding the personality and the attitude of the market, just like we do as designers every time we do research for a product, we were able to set the pricing at the right level. So this is something that works for every element of business. So could I use this method to design my life? It's an interesting question. So I left Zynga about 3 years ago. And as Gilles mentioned, I've been a senior executive for quite a while. And I will tell you something about being a senior executive, whether it's Zynga or MySpace or Yahoo, is you do not own your time. You work, you go home, you cook dinner with the phone next to you, you check email between stirring, you eat with the laptop next to you, you put the kid on the TV. I used to message with my boss at 2 a.m. because that's when she had time to talk to me. I realized this was not really a life that was working out for me. First of all, I'd like to see her grow up. And second of all, I was starting to develop an ulcer. So I left Zynga, I just quit with no future. And I spent a lot of quality time watching food TV. And after about 6 months of laying on the floor, trying to figure out what I should do, I thought, well, let's use the old system. I remember the words of Richard Saul Wurman. Do you know who Richard Saul Wurman is? Yay, yay. So Richard Saul Wurman founded TED, among other things. And I saw him at a conference at the IA Summit. He was keynoting there. And I was like, Mr. Wurman, I like to put on events. Can you give me any advice from TED? And he goes, no. Richard Saul Wurman is a lovely man. He said, no. And I was like, oh. And he said, you would have to follow me around for weeks. He said, first of all, I design the program. I pick the speakers. Okay. I read over their talks. Okay. I sit on stage and I kick them off if they aren't any good. Okay. He says, I design the furniture. He doesn't like these chairs. He says, I hire the chef and I taste the menu. He says, I have the music composed. This is a guy, there's this thing at hotels where if you want to hold a conference, they give you the package deal. And it lists, chicken on Saturday, salmon on Sunday, just sort of like, and here's our chairs, and here's our ballroom with a big crystal chandelier because we have weddings here. That's the package deal. This is a man who never takes the package deal ever. And that's how he makes TED. And I realized I should invent a life. Why am I taking the Silicon Valley's package deal? We'll pay you a huge amount of money. All you have to do is always be available. Forget that. Forget the package deal. So what would Richard Saul Wurman do? He might do something like this. I formed a hypothesis. Actually, he wouldn't do that. He would just make art, but this is how I did it. I formed a hypothesis. I might enjoy teaching. And then I asked myself, what's the smallest possible thing I can do to test this hypothesis? So if I'd been my friends, and I know a lot of them that did this, I might have gone back to school, right, and get a big PhD and then start teaching. But no, I went to a little startup called General Assembly, who, as a startup, they don't actually care about credentials, possibly other things that they didn't care about back then. And they let me just teach one night class. And I loved it. I loved teaching. And then I taught another one, and I liked that too. So they invited me to teach their intensive, which is teaching every single day, all day long for 8 weeks. I hated that. I didn't like that so much. It was every single day. It was too much. I didn't have time to write. Didn't have enough time for that one. So I started asking around, and I found California College of the Arts. And that worked out okay. I'm very happy teaching now. I teach 2 classes. I write, I run, I travel. I get to see folks like you. I invented a life for myself little bit by testing, creating hypothesis, measuring it, and getting better. What's interesting about teaching is teaching has 3 core pieces. It has introducing the ideas and knowledge. You have to teach people the actual knowledge they're going to work with. You have to have them do activities to practice it. And you have to give some time for them to reflect and put it back in. Well, it turns out that there's this thing called the experiential learning model. This is older than Lean Startup. It's older than UCD. This is something that's been around for a while. And, oh, look, it's world modeling. Your students need to model the world, too. So you do something. You ask them to go out and interview 5 people. What happened? Did people refuse to talk to you? Did you learn something? What worked and what didn't work? So what? Did we learn anything from it? And then what will you do differently? This is a beautiful, amazing model for learning. So students learn with prototypes, with Post-it notes, with walls. Everybody learns this way. So it's not a model for inventing a life. It's a model for learning. It's a model for making businesses. It's a model for, as far as I can tell, just about everything. So in a classic lecture class, you talk a lot, blah, 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 like I'm doing right now. And there's some reflection and testing, and there's very little doing. But if you want to learn, it's a lot more doing and a lot less talking. So my question now is, could we design the entire world? Could we design the entire world? I was just at UX Israel. It was an amazing conference. And I got sick, like you do when you travel too much. And so I went over to the Sonora market, and I had a big bowl of ramen. It wasn't California ramen, but it was hot and delicious. And the place was crazy. It was so full of people. Like, I could barely walk because of all the push carts of the kids, right? All the parents with their strollers. And then I got home, and I was in a deli, and the TV was on, and the word Tel Aviv was up there. And I found out that there'd been shooters. And they'd shot right outside the market I'd been, the market that was full of children's strollers. And no kids were killed, thank God, but 4 people were killed. And it's an old war, and it's been going on for a long time. It's a wicked problem. Nobody has solved this one. And then, a couple days later, I found out that at a nightclub in Florida, there'd been another shooter. Maybe he was a terrorist, maybe he was just a crazy guy with too much access to guns, I can't say. But 40 people lost their babies that day. 80 people, I guess, parents, maybe more. So many people died that day. And this is a wicked problem. And so I think back on IDEO. Is it really hubris for us to work on these problems? Who are we? We just make apps. You know, we make websites. Is it hubris or is it courage? Maybe it's time for us to say, we're done. We can't allow this world to be the way it is. We're going to model a new world. We're going to use our skills, our knowledge, our understanding, and we're going to make a world that it's okay for our kids to grow up in. We're not going to let these acts of violence continue. And I know you're in Switzerland. Like, it's a safe little corner of the world. But I also know you've been in the middle of some pretty hairy stuff in the past. And you know, the safest, quietest place can be not so safe and not so quiet at any given moment. And unless we have the courage to step up and use our powers to change the world, like people like Jen Downs are doing, or Russ Unger at 18F, we got a new generation of designers who are stepping up and saying, let's make government better. Let's make our world better. So maybe IDEO was right. Maybe they weren't jerks. Maybe they will design all the things. So Emerson's essay opens with a quote from someone else, which I will also read to you. Man is his own star, and the soul that can render an honest and perfect man commands all light, all influence, all fate. Nothing to him falls too early or too late. Our acts, our angels are, for good or ill, our fatal shadows that walk by us still. It's that line, our acts, our angels are. It's what we do in the world that will act as angels, angels of mercy, angels of kindness, angels of inspiration, but we have to act. Thank you.